Hello, my name is Bruce Overman, and I'm the current chair of the National World War II Glider Pilots Committee of the Silent Wings Museum Foundation. This symposium is a joint endeavor between our organization, the Silent Wings Museum, and the 94th Flying Training Squadron, 306th Flying Training Group at the United States Air Force Academy. This symposium will be broken into two segments of approximately 2 hours each, with a 1 hour break between the segments. Two World War II veterans, Mr. Roger Smith and Mr. Curtis Cameron, will be introduced in the second segment. Mr. Fred Lundy will make a brief audio appearance later this morning. For those of you attending this symposium in real time, you may ask questions or make comments during the presentation by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. These will be addressed at the end of each presentation. Our organization certainly has a long name, but it reflects our evolution. In 1970, U.S. glider pilots that had served in World War II formed the National World War II Glider Pilots Association. Over the years, this organization grew to over 3,000 members who held the MOS 1026 glider pilot during the war. In 2002, the association donated their restored CG-4A glider and numerous personal artifacts to the city of Lubbock, Texas, who, in turn, built a world-class museum dedicated entirely to telling the story of the World War II glider pilots. You'll hear more about the museum later in the program. At the same time the museum was dedicated, the glider pilots formed another organization, the Silent Wings Museum Foundation. The foundation was created to provide financial assistance to the museum and to increase public awareness of the World War II glider program. Since the Glider Pilots Association was formed as a nonprofit veterans organization, its bylaws included a provision that it must disband when there were fewer than 100 active veteran members. That occurred in 2018. However, by then, the organization included not only the remaining glider pilots, but also other troop carrier personnel, relatives and friends, as well as researchers and authors. Shuttering the organization was not an option we were willing to consider, so we reformed as a standing committee of the Silent Wings Museum Foundation. We publish a quarterly newsletter, The Briefing, and hold an annual reunion and symposium. Our Leon B. Spencer research team provides historical information on a daily basis to family members inquiring about their World War II relatives. In 2016, the association was contacted by Lieutenant Colonel Jeremy Lushnat, then the commander of the 94th Flying Training Squadron. Colonel Lushnat was instrumental in establishing a relationship between the 94th and the Glider Pilots Committee. When Jeremy retired from the Air Force, he joined our organization and now serves as our liaison to the 94th. The primary mission of our organization is to honor our few remaining World War II glider pilots and support personnel, including the greater troop carrier community, and the memory of those who are no longer with us. We collect, preserve, and promulgate the history of their unique contribution to our country. This has been a brief description of who we are and how we're connected to the 94th FTS. As this symposium proceeds, this connection will be repeatedly demonstrated. This symposium also incorporates several elements that would have been included in our annual reunion in Lubbock. In keeping with one of those traditions, I would now ask our chaplain, Susan Pinter, to open this symposium with a prayer.
Good morning and welcome to everyone. Most gracious God, we thank you for every person that has worked on this new format, for each mind and heart that has created this symposium, and each person who will view it. We thank you. We had an idea, a vision, and a goal to achieve. We had different talents, abilities, and a very short time to work. Strengthen our confidence in who you have made us to be. Set us free from comparison in order to work together for our goal. Bless this work of ours, this symposium today. Bless all those present, as well as the lives of those who will view it later. Ready us to make every moment count. O gracious and gentle spirit of love, your energy permeates the universe, igniting earth with your goodness, truth, and beauty. Open our minds and hearts to a deeper awareness of our interconnectedness within you, with each other, and all of creation. May we experience your unique presence within the sacred web of creation. Amen.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Lushnat, and I am the committee's liaison to the 94th Flying Training Squadron, located at the United States Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, Colorado. When I was the commander of the 94th from 2016 to 2018, another lieutenant colonel in the squadron, Paul Roberts, and I sought opportunities to connect the 94th's nearly 200 glider instructor and upgrading glider instructor pilots with the squadrons and our country's rich glider heritage. Paul and I were fortunate to discover and then be able to establish a new partnership with the World War II Glider Pilots Committee. And we had no idea how impactful this relationship would become. From hosting heritage events and authoring articles, to attending reunions and being invited to the European Theater for a variety of events, the 94th personnel, the people who will pass glider-related knowledge and history onto the next generations, have benefited from in-person interactions, first and second-hand accounts of what happened during the Great War, and robust access to primary and secondary sources of information related to the many events that happened on the battlefield. Now both retired from the Air Force, both Paul and I have enjoyed observing our successors evolve the relationship between the 94th and the committee. Both Lieutenant Colonel Doug Shue Whitmer, the 94th commander from 2018 to 2020, and Lieutenant Colonel Hump Humphrey, the current commander, have continued to pursue initiatives to bring greater awareness to the officers, enlisted members, and United States Air Force Academy cadets flying with the 94th. We look forward to great anticipation to what is in store in the coming years. The 94th Flying Training Squadron of the 306th Flying Training Group is a direct descendant of the 94th Troop Carrier Squadron of the 439th Troop Carrier Group, a unit that flew 5 missions during World War II. Today's 94th conducts over 20,000 training and competition glider sortie and simulation events annually, and is focused on developing officership, leadership, and character for over 4,000 United States Air Force Academy and Reserve Officer Training Corps cadets. It is the only unit in the United States Department of Defense whose mission is to conduct glider training and operations. What is truly amazing is that the instructor pilots are also first and second class cadets. They're juniors and seniors. How this happens is at the end of their freshman year, a number, sometimes up to 60, 70 individuals of new sophomores or third classmen are selected from eligible candidates to become glider instructor pilots. 1 week before graduation, these cadets receive their wings in a special ceremony. These wings are known as G-wings, and the same wings worn by World War II glider pilots. For the past several years, the World War II Glider Pilots Committee has presented an award at the G-wing ceremony. The award reads, "This award is in remembrance of the World War II glider pilots who faced innumerable obstacles and challenges and overcame them by implementing innovative techniques and taking the risks necessary to complete their missions. The first class or second class cadet soaring instructor who has applied innovation to trials in order to ensure the success of the 94th Flying Training Squadron shall be presented with this award." Appropriately, the award is titled G is for Guts. We are privileged today and thankful to have the 2021 recipient of the G is for Guts Award, Second Lieutenant Andrew Kreitz, with us today. And you'll hear more about him and you'll hear directly from him later today. I am now honored to present our first presenter, Cadet First Class Cole Resnik, a senior at the United States Air Force Academy. Cole hails from Topeka, Kansas, is an experienced glider pilot, or glider instructor pilot. He is also the Cadet Squadron commander for Cadet Squadron 39, also known as the Jedi Knights. He is the class secretary for the class of 2022, is majoring in foreign area studies and minoring in Arabic. He's no slouch. And he plans on becoming a pilot upon graduation next summer. Of note, his great-grandfather served in the 2nd Armored Division in Europe from 1941 to 1945, where he earned a Silver Star. Cole, thank you, and over to you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and let me pull up my slides here. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. I'm Cadet First Class Cole Resnik from the United States Air Force Academy. It is a tremendous honor to give this presentation today, and is actually based on my article in your newsletter and in an issue of the Air Force Historical Foundation's Air Power History Journal published last spring. I am equally proud to be a soaring instructor pilot at the 94th Flying Training Squadron here at the Academy. It just proves that flying gliders is a generational affair, and we are incredibly thankful for our predecessors of World War II. The 94th remains unique in that it is home to the youngest instructor pilots in the Air Force, and I am proud to be one of them. It was flying and instructing in this airframe that inspired me to take a closer look at the history of gliders in combat. Today, cadets like me use these gliders to teach other cadets the fundamentals of flying. After all, flying without an engine really emphasizes the importance of rudimentary aviation skills. However, these aircraft were not always trainers as they are today. In World War II, where the focus of my presentation today lies, gliders played a central role in major combat operations. And let's explore that in an environment that all Americans are familiar with, the invasion of Normandy. It is D-Day, June 6, 1944. After enduring hours of blistering German machine gun fire and artillery barrages, Allied infantrymen finally began securing the beachheads at Normandy. What immediately followed was a logistical nightmare, until the Allies captured the French port of Cherbourg 24 days after D-Day, or D+24. All equipment destined for mainland Europe needed to flow through the beaches. At Omaha Beach in particular, invasion planners wanted 8,000 tons of supplies to hit the sand there every day. On D+4, only 4,561 of the promised 32,000 tons made it ashore. Across all 5 beachheads, the Allies delivered only 13% of planned inventory of vehicles, ammunition, rations, and other supplies. It would be 2 more days on D+6 when the amphibious resupply missions began meeting initial expectations. Well, what caused the delay? Before the invasion, the U.S. Army tasked 5,000 special engineers to clear a path through the decimated landscape. However, still harassed by German fire, officers reassigned hundreds of these engineers to infantry roles when they waded ashore, and consequently undermanned engineering brigades cleared obstacles, constructed beach exits, and established staging areas much slower than originally anticipated. The effect of this backlog rippled from the shoreline. As part of the invasion, airborne paratroopers dropped miles behind the beaches, but with supply lines from the beaches not yet established, they needed to acquire equipment elsewhere. The only remaining options were reinforcement by glider or by airdrop. While awaiting the arrival of reinforcements from the beach following the initial invasion of Normandy, the artillery pieces and ammunition delivered by combat gliders exclusively helped the outgunned paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division hold the surrounding area of St. Mary-Glise. Airborne commanders trusted gliders more than airdrops in the aftermath of D-Day because of their express ability to deliver heavy equipment behind enemy lines in a precise, cohesive, and timely manner. I constrained my research in 2 different ways. First, by focusing on one of the 2 airborne divisions at Normandy, the 82nd, and straying from studying the already well-known glider assault missions landing at the same time as the paratroopers on D-Day morning. First question, why the 82nd? Although this project focuses exclusively on paratroopers in the 82nd, it is worth noting that aircraft in 3 major operations reinforced the 101st Airborne Division around D-Day. However, these missions were much less impactful to them compared to the 82nd. Within hours of jumping, some companies of the 101st linked up with men from the 4th Infantry Division at beach exits, and the 82nd, on the other hand, was deeper inland, and so the need for aerial resupply and reinforcement was much greater for that division, so a better assessment of glider effectiveness lies with them. The 82nd Airborne centered its invasion operations on the French town of Saint-Mihiel-Glisse. The town marked the center of a web of roads as shown on your screen that connected other villages in the Continental Peninsula. Before reaching Saint-Mihiel-Glisse, an army would need to pass over the Mer de Ray River on bridges at Lafayette and Chef du Pont. Although the town itself, it was an important objective, capturing both of those bridges was crucial. If American paratroopers did so, they could slow German reinforcements coming north from Cherbourg or west from Brittany. This almost 7-mile buffer zone provided the vulnerable amphibious infantrymen coming ashore. Therefore, in the morning hours of June 6, the 82nd dropped in and around Saint-Mihiel-Glisse. Second question is, why study the glider reinforcement missions and not the assault ones? And to answer this, we must look at the impact of each set of missions on airborne operations during the invasion. Despite the element of surprise, a division of soldiers with small arms could not sustain a fight with the battle-hardened German tank and panzer divisions that lurked nearby Saint-Mihiel-Glisse. The average paratrooper landed with an M1 Garand, an M1911 pistol, a knife, extra ammunition, 3 days of rations, a few explosives, and other personal gear if, and only if, their leg bag remained attached after the jump. Some dropped with mortar tubes and bazookas, but these soldiers lacked the firepower necessary to compete with an armored enemy on a consistent basis. The initial lack of firepower proved troublesome for units like the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Of the two bridges, the 82nd tasked the 505th with seizing the one at Lafayette. The bridge was incredibly valuable. Designed like a bottleneck, it acted as a natural defense mechanism by forcing the invader to concentrate its forces. Later, they hoped to meet the 4th Infantry Division there, for its tanks would cross the bridge to reinforce the paratroopers. But unknown to the 505th, reinforcement was days away. The 4th Division spent D+1 on the beachhead where they would gain only 2,000 yards. Any confrontation with an armored German battalion without heavy weaponry of their own threatened the success of the 505th. With Allied armored personnel stuck on the beaches, paratroopers required a weapon system that was powerful enough to penetrate tank armor, yet light enough for aircraft to deliver behind enemy lines. In the meantime, paratroopers improvised. They relied heavily on bazookas to counter German tanks early on. Unfortunately, these were not always accessible, and in lieu of bazookas, one team used a combination of gammon grenades and Browning machine gun fire to disable an advancing tank. A gammon grenade was a bag filled with plastic explosives, and it required a paratrooper to sneak up close, and then he would then throw the bag by the strap and pray that it would not detonate prematurely. Risky tactics like that helped the invaders liberate the city that day. And despite the victory, morale dropped as soldiers realized that without reinforcement, defending the town would likely cost them their lives. Fortunately, gliders carrying 57mm howitzers in the assault missions answered their prayers. Robert Murphy, a paratrooper of the 505th, described these anti-tank guns as, and I quote, God-sent gifts that were hauled out and put to excellent use against tank battalions, end quote. Some paratroopers were so desperate for the guns that they spent hours ripping one out of an orchard after its glider slammed into it. Despite landing 32 artillery pieces at dawn of D-Day, only half saw battle. The mangled steel of less fortunate gliders swallowed the rest. And by noon of June 6th, the 82nd positioned 4 of these guns at Lafayette and 2 or 3 on the outskirts of Saint-Mihiel-Glisse. However, as sunlight faded on D-Day, so did ammunition for the howitzers. Many crews pulled the firing pin from their 57mm guns and abandoned them as they awaited the arrival of more rounds. Gliders would carry more guns and ammunition to them soon, and as crews stuffed the precious cargo into them, the fate of the 82nd now rested on the shoulders of the pilots and the reinforcement missions. Around 2100 hours on D-Day, nearly 200 of those pilots anxiously awaited takeoff in an armada of gliders. The mission was crucial, but thankfully the aircraft could carry the load required. Despite their plywood floor and steel tube frame, these engineless aircraft could carry thousands of pounds of precious equipment from the sky down to the battlefield. The American-produced Waco CG-4A glider could haul 4,060 pounds of supplies. With that load capacity, the pilots crammed the glider with different combinations of both men and equipment. Typically, gliders carried 15 infantrymen with gear or a quarter-ton truck and a 6-man crew. At times, a 1-ton ammunition trailer or a small bulldozer accompanied the pilots on their mission. The Horsa II could carry twice that load. The British glider could fly with 7,380 pounds stuffed in its fuselage, and that equaled 25 infantrymen with gear, 4 motorcycles complete with 8 troops and equipment, or a 1-ton supply trailer attached to a quarter-ton Jeep. The reinforcement mission, nicknamed Elmira, was simple. The 176 gliders hooked the C-47s would depart England, fly to the coast of France, and disconnect from their tow planes near the beaches at Normandy. From there, pilots needed to spot the landing zone in darkness, establish a proper approach to miss the abundant debris, and touch down on speed, all while managing enemy fire. If executed properly, the gliders would deliver more of the vital 6-pounder anti-tank guns, vehicles, and ammunition and bulk supplies that could be obtained in no other way. 2 more missions, Galveston and Hackensack, would follow the next morning with landing times at 0700 hours and 0900 hours, respectively. Into the morning, paratroopers watched as 376 gliders from all 3 missions landed near the village with 57 guns, 81 tons of ammunition, 121 tons of combat equipment, and 161 vehicles. These 3 deliveries quadrupled the amount of equipment delivered by glider at dawn of D-Day. Most importantly, the influx of more artillery equipment kept the 82nd fighting for days. In fact, in the midst of the Lee's landings during the morning of June 7, 2 tanks from the German 91st Air Landing Division advanced on St. Miraglise from the north. Both posed a threat to light airborne infantry units, barricaded the buildings across the village. Without hesitation, paratroopers utilized an anti-tank gun to disable the lead tank. The second one was a sitting duck, and another crew made quick work of it. The credit for these kills does not entirely belong to the crews themselves. A portion of it belongs to the brave glider pilots who delivered both guns only hours before the attack. For the next days, wave after wave of German counterattacks pounded the town as American supplies dwindled. Thankfully, crash gliders continued serving as miniature supply depots. As supplies ran thin during battle, jeeps and tanks would dash away, only to return with trailers overflowing with equipment stripped from gliders. The fresh supplies kept the division fighting until their withdrawal on June 11. Ultimately, the glider assault missions of D-Day helped paratroopers survive against an armed enemy, whereas the reinforcement missions helped them win. It is these missions that require a closer evaluation. Now, what about these combat gliders made them more effective than airdrops for logistical operations at the time? Undoubtedly, the preciseness in which pilots landed gliders carrying artillery pieces contributed to the success of the airborne troops behind enemy lines. In comparison to the parachute resupply missions of D+1, gliders proved more consistent in delivering equipment to the designated area. The airdrop missions attempted to build on the success of the glider assault missions of June 6. Aircraft and mission Freeport would reinforce the 82nd Division at St. Miraglise by dropping bundles of ammunition, food, and combat gear. In the morning hours of D+1, an armada of 208 planes loaded with 234 tons of cargo departed England for Normandy. Poor weather jeopardized the mission from the beginning, and despite favorable reports, the formation encountered ceilings as low as 300 feet. The weather improved closer to France, and the disorganized formations tightened up. During the chaos, however, some planes received beacon signals to drop 3 miles northeast from the designated drop area. The 82nd repositioned the beacon because Germans controlled the proposed drop zone. Half of the air crews never received the message, and consequently, the 82nd recovered less than 100 tons on D+1 as many bundles fell into German hands. With 40% of the promised supplies missing, paratroopers went hungry on D+2. Fortunately, airdropped equipment followed strict size and weight requirements, so loadmasters could not push quarter-ton jeeps or 1-ton artillery guns out of C-47s, so the paratroopers did not lose equipment of great value. Gliders in Mission Galveston and Mission Hackensack redeemed the 9th Troop Carrier Command by outperforming the airdrops, for their pilots delivered precious anti-tank guns on target. And these daylight glider missions were highly accurate on D+1 thanks to the capabilities of both the aircraft and its pilot. First, both the Waco and Horsa models were highly maneuverable. They needed to be, for military strategists wanted gliders to release from tow between 200 and 300 feet. At such a low altitude, the aircraft could stay aloft for only 30 seconds. So pilots required a responsive yoke that would allow them to maneuver toward the landing zone quickly. General Henry Hap Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Forces, even attested to his capabilities. He recalled watching a Waco land, and I quote, about 3 feet from a man the pilot had stationed on the runway previously, end quote. Second, glider pilots were just as capable as the aircraft. Before earning their wings, pilots underwent 72 hours of ground instruction and 30 hours of flight training with a particular emphasis on spot landing proficiency. During the reinforcement missions of D+1, the conditions tested both the pilot and the glider. After releasing off tow, pilots struggled for control as dense rain and gusty winds slammed against the canvas gliders. The situation was worse on the ground as pools of debris, water, and Rommel's asparagus and German infantrymen littered the landing area. This was an unusual case for the pilots, of whom many just completed flight school stateside in picture-perfect weather. Despite these complications, over 50% of gliders landed within a mile of the designated landing areas near St. Mary-Glees. In the last serial to land, 25 hit the zone and another 19 were within a mile of it. The remaining 6 were probably not far off. Simply put, the glider missions compensated for missed airdrops by delivering artillery pieces where paratroopers needed them most. The second advantage to gliders lies in its ability to deliver men and equipment together as a unified force, whereas airdrops further displace the paratroopers. In doing so, the landing party can engage the enemy immediately with the equipment accompanying them. Such tactics were impossible for soldiers dropping by parachute on D-Day. The missed time jumps displaced almost 80% of paratroopers, so many spent the first 2 days regrouping. This disposition of the airborne divisions curtailed their effectiveness. Additionally, the jump separated operators from their equipment. Some equipment fell into untrained hands, and as Murphy remembered, paratroopers raided bundles and would later find the rightful owner of the light machine gun, 60 millimeter, 81 millimeter mortar, bazooka, or ammunition they acquired and make a swap. Until then, however, the unit was largely ineffective. In gliders, operators never lost sight of their equipment, and this was devastating to the enemy. As former glider pilot William Knickerbocker put it, and I quote, "We were one hell of an asset when we landed together," end quote. The reinforcement missions near St. Mary-Glees proved Knickerbocker right. In gliders, the 307th Medical Company landed with medical supplies, the 82nd Signal Company with communications equipment, and the 80th Anti-Aircraft Battalion with howitzers. As a result, the 3 units started work immediately. Doctors treated the wounded, radio men reestablished communication with forces on the beach, and gun crews built new batteries. Even isolated, a single glider crew was a formidable force. For instance, upon landing, Technical Sergeant Shimko and his glider team were ready for combat. According to him, within minutes, they, and I quote, "unload the glider and put the equipment and ammunition in hedgerows in the area where we took up a defensive position," end quote. Pairing equipment with its trained operator paid dividends for the airborne. While paratroopers attempted to piece together the unit in the hours after landing, glider crews were confronting an armored enemy with artillery almost immediately. And this cohesion saved valuable time in the field. Unlike airdrops, glider crews could find, unload, and use their artillery pieces within minutes to reinforce outgunned paratroopers. Leading up to the arrival of gliders, paratroopers wasted time searching for airdrop supplies. Upon regrouping, units would send men to recover cargo bundles, and as noted earlier, many of these bundles landed miles away from the paratroopers. Additional time spent locating and unpacking them endangered the lives of soldiers on the beach who relied on the airborne to capture certain objectives by specific times. Even acquiring the means of transporting the equipment back was troublesome. Only 47 Jeeps reached France by glider on D-Day, and most were inoperable after crash landings. Some paratroopers even resorted to stealing German vehicles, and driving along the French countryside, they were magnets to friendly fire. After realizing the cost of retrieving airdropped cargo far outweighed any potential gain from the equipment encased, paratroopers began ignoring them. Compared to the airdrops, the glider reinforcement missions did not steal precious time away from the paratroopers. In fact, most glider crews could unload the equipment within minutes. The glider's design saved crews valuable time. In the Waco, a pulley system lifted the nose of the aircraft. In the Horza, explosive charges would remove the tail section when detonated. The quickness in which units disembarked even surprised the Germans. A one glider crew landed under the muzzle of a German 88 millimeter gun, and before it could fire on the stationary aircraft, its crew calmly got out, raised the nose, and unloaded a Jeep into which they packed their equipment. Crews could even salvage equipment out of crashed gliders in a quick manner. One managed to unearth a buried Jeep in 30 minutes. On D+1, this expedience was crucial to paratroopers bunkered down around St. Mary-Glees. In fact, a single glider immediately reinforced a platoon outnumbered 5-1. Thanks to precise landing, the glider crew unloaded a 57mm anti-tank gun and ammunition on the American position. According to reports, this gun neutralized the enemy force. The fast response and unloading times of the glider crews relieved paratroopers in a way that was impossible by airdrops. During the first week of operations in Normandy, combat gliders pulled the most weight. Unlike airdrops, gliders could deliver a combat-ready unit on time and on target. Additionally, the glider reinforcement missions of D-Day onward brought essential weaponry and ammunition to help an airborne division capture positions defended by an armored enemy. For historian Roland Rupenthal, and I quote, "The efficiency of a logistic system must be measured not only in terms of the certainty and promptness of resupply which it ensures, but also by the freedom of action it allows the field forces," end quote. Using that logic and the argument presented, the combat gliders used to reinforce the 82nd Airborne in Normandy did so in the best way imaginable. Thank you.
This is exciting to see. You know, you're about to graduate in a year, and you're already this interested in something that's obviously pretty relevant to this organization. What did you enjoy most, or where do you think you're going to go next with research? So maybe that's two questions. What did you enjoy most about this project, and what's next?
So speaking on what's next, you know, after graduation, I'm pursue graduate school, and I specifically want to graduate school for history. And so I think the lessons learned from all the research I compiled in this, and this is a culmination of around a year and a half, almost 2 years of research alone. It just goes to show how much not only the research team at the Silent Wings Museum, but also across the nation, how much time they devote into just recalling some of these stories from the past. And so I want to take it a next step further. I've already talked to Mrs. Overman about potentially writing again for the newsletter, and I'm happy to do so to get more insight and perspective. The thing I really enjoyed about this whole process was just getting to hear the stories and firsthand accounts from the men that conducted these operations that were there on the ground. And it's truly amazing. Even instructor pilots here at the 94th aren't really that aware of glider usage past pre the academy. So it was a very humbling and very gracious experience, and I'm glad I can apply it and teach my fellow instructor pilots about it going into the future.
Awesome, thank you. Are there any other questions from anyone in the forum?
If I might interject, there is one question here on the Q&A. I just want to make sure I answered it here. And it's from Mike, and it says, what was the attrition rate of gliders landing during D-Day? And for my research, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, the attrition rate was upwards of 90%, in that most of the gliders that landed during the D-Day and the Normandy operation specifically were inoperable thereafter. And it was, instead of a landing, it was more of a crash landing, just because of the amount of debris on the ground and the chaos that ensued during particularly these pre-dawn missions. And then there was another question about the casualty rate among glider pilots on these missions. And I don't know specifically, someone else on the panel might be able to answer that question. And I don't know off the top of my head or some of the research I've done. Does anyone else, any other panelists know?
I'm not seeing the question.
Cole, what was the question again?
The question was, what was the casualty rate among glider pilots on these missions? And when they refer to these missions, I'm assuming the D-Day missions.
Okay, D-Day mission, I think it was 3%.
Our technical director here is telling me that on D-Day, she believes it was 3%.
I think that's right, because I remember reading about it, and it was very low among the pilots themselves.